Public transportation plays a critical role in rural America. I'm Paul Comfort, and on this episode of Transit Unplugged, we talk to Ginny Smith. She's the executive director of the Cape Girardeau County Transit Authority, and she explains to us the role that public transportation plays in her community, how they use vanpools to get people to jobs, even outside their jurisdiction, the new partnership they've just established with Southeast Missouri State University to provide on-campus transportation, how they're partnering with Flixbus and Greyhound to provide inner-city transportation, and the continued case for investment, how sometimes in rural America, when state funds are lowered, you have to come up with creative ideas to make up that difference. Ginny tells us what they've done, and I talk about some of what I did in my past when I led a rural community transportation service and what the future looks like. Cape Girardeau Transit is looking into AI and the role it can play in helping them improve safety on their system. This is a fantastic interview with a good friend of mine, Ginny Smith, Executive Director of the Cape Girardeau County Transit Authority. Enjoy. Great to be with Ginny Smith. Ginny is the Executive Director of the Cape Girardeau Transit Authority. Thanks for being with us today, Ginny.
Hey, thanks for having me, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. Ginny and I met recently at the Midwest Transit Conference, I think it was, right? Ginny,
Yep.
we were in Kansas City?
Yep.
Yeah, it was good. We did, in addition to speaking, I was able to moderate like I haven't done anything like this before with this many people, like 25 like executives in a circle, and we all just talked about hot topics. Do you remember that one?
Yeah. That's several people in that room. Lots to say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it was good times, and afterwards I thought, Ginny, we should get you on the show. Ginny's from Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Tell us where that's at in the state, Ginny.
So Southeast Missouri. So definitely we're north of the Boot Heel, but south of St. Louis about by 100 miles.
And are you from that area?
Yes.
Yeah. I've heard about it in the past. There was a famous radio guy that used to always say, he's from Cape Girardeau. That's the main way I've heard about it. So having been in talk radio for a long time. Hey, so tell us about your transit system some and how you got into it all.
So I've been in public transit for a little bit over 10 years, probably going closer to actually 15 if I think about it. Definitely went from the for-profit side of life in transportation. So I did trucking dispatch for years and safety for a company that way, which kind of drove my passion for logistics and definitely created my love for wanting to do something. But then I found that I needed to do something more. So that's what brought me into the nonprofit side of transit. But our system is very unique in the aspect of we are a whole county transportation system. So we are small urban. We have a portion of our county that is designated small urban. And then we have the remainder of our county that is considered rural transportation. So we get to dip into both pots of both rural and urban funding. So it's quite interesting and unique.
Yeah, that is cool. So how does that work? The city part is the urban part, over 50,000 kind of a thing?
Yeah, it is. So it's actually a little bit more than city. And so Cape is kind of unique in the aspect of it includes two different communities because our county seat is actually Jackson, not Cape Girardeau. And so it includes that. And then it also includes the airport, which is kind of down into Scott County. So it's very unique. So that's our urban portion. And then the remainder of the county is the rural.
Okay. And about how many people do you serve in that area?
85,000 is the population of Cape Girardeau.
Very good. And tell us about your transit system. What is it made up of?
So we have vanpool, we have paratransit, obviously on demand, and then we have fixed route service. And then this year, starting at the beginning of the fiscal year, we took over the transportation system for the Southeast Missouri State University. So they've always got their funding through us. It's like a flow-through agency through the FTA. But we actually are now running that system. So that's been quite unique and full of its own challenges. So we actually operate 4 different fixed routes.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's cool. So you're running the on-campus like transit.
Yes, but it services the whole community. So because the campus is actually laid out across all of Cape Girardeau. So they have a river campus that they just recently added. So it's definitely more theater. Beautiful setting.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. I love that. Yeah. So, one of the things I love about having folks from more rural areas on is rural public transportation really is a lifeline. We have a TV show, Transit Unplugged TV, and I focused on Queen Anne's County, Maryland, where I'm from, which is a very similar size county to where you're at. I was the county administrator and a county commissioner here. And I love the role that our transit system here plays in improving the lives of people who really don't have any other options. If you live in the city, if you have to, you can call a cab or an Uber if you couldn't get the bus or whatever. But a lot of times they don't have those options very readily available in rural areas. Tell us about how your transit system is really a lifeline for people in the county.
Well, you said it. So Cape is a rather larger population. We do have Uber and Lyft. We have very few of those options available. But honestly, there are people who couldn't get to dialysis and all of those things that live in the county without us. But we still offer the convenience of having that fixed route service if you do live in the city. And the city subsidizes that. So it's free for our riders right now, which is a huge benefit to those individuals and families who can't, pay for it otherwise. But ultimately, it's creating that on-demand service that allows the people who are 30 and 40 minutes away that have aged and didn't really plan to have to move from their home to continue to get that services and those pieces that happen inside the city. And we act like that community gathering piece there.
Yeah, that's good. How's ridership going for your system?
It's up tremendously. So I started in November of 23, and we've seen over a 30% increase since I started.
Wow, that's great, Jenny. It's awesome. And how about a lot of folks had trouble with drivers? How are you doing on drivers?
I think that is the magic formula. If someone could figure that out and work on that for all of us, that would be great. But, we struggle with that as well, too. Fortunately, we don't have to have a lot of drivers that qualify with a CDL with passenger endorsements. We have a smaller fleet, so we don't have to have those buses that require those, but we struggle. It's like the minute we gain 10 drivers and we think we're at capacity, the next thing you know, we've had 2 or 3 of them leave, or, my wife says, hey, it's really time for me to retire. I'm not going to drive anymore. So it's kind of that magic 1 step forward, 2 steps back.
Yeah. What's the size of your fleet and your employee pool and all that?
So we're up to about 60 vehicles right now.
That's good. And how many drivers and staff and all that do you have?
Yeah, that varies. Sometimes that's as low as 55, which is really like as far as completely, and then high is around 65 to 70. We need that driver pool to be just about 70, honestly.
Okay. And what about vanpool? Tell us how that works. A lot of people aren't familiar with that, I don't think.
Yeah, so our vanpool services 2 different large plants. So a lot of people are very familiar with Procter and Gamble, who do a lot of products, and we have that here in Cape Girardeau. But unfortunately, they are very close to the Mississippi River, which is not inside the city limits of Cape Girardeau. So we have a huge population that struggles to get out to work. So we run a van pool for them twice a day to get them to and from work, as well as Gilster Mary Lee, which most people realize that they're like the cereal plant. So they do like honey bunches of oats and things like that. But that is actually in a different county. So we provide that service from Cape to that county and then back twice a day.
And explain how a van pool works, like practically. Do people have vans that you give them and they take them home at night and then drive and pick people up and go to work, or what happens?
We kind of run a little bit of a different, we're the driver in the van. They just pay us kind of like a weekly ticket to use the service. And so we have found, that most people, when they realize what it is, $30 a week to pay, they can't pay for insurance or different things like that. And the employers kind of help offset that with covering the other half of that cost.
Oh, that's great. So basically it's employment-based transportation for people. Pick them up at their house, take them to work. It's got to be based around their shifts, right? It works well in shift work?
Yeah, 12-hour shifts. And so that's right. And we actually have centralized pickup locations. We don't even pick up people from their homes because that's just really possible. We hit around 5 or 10 different spots, depending on the routes, to pick up that people that need that. And they walk to there primarily, or they use our other service to get there.
Okay. And about how many people a day are you taking on van pools?
It depends on the time of the season, but usually no less than 10, but upwards of 15 per shift coming and going.
And as a county government agency, do you like report up to the county commissioners or the county manager or whatever?
We do. Yes. Yeah. We report out to the county commission.
Do you have like an advisory board or anything, or you just?
We do. We do have a board of directors as well.
Okay. That's very good. And what's your annual budget, operating budget, would you say?
A little bit over $3.5 million.
You're also doing some work regionally, right? Aren't you working with Flixbus to kind of do some intercity transportation?
We are, and we're super excited about that partnership because the Greyhound and BART, they used to call it here as well too, is 2 different systems. They have no longer serviced the community for several years now, pre-COVID actually, and we needed that transportation because that link to St. Louis, as our company sets, we're driver shortage. So we don't have a lot of extra vehicles to kind of create a route to do that connection piece, whether it be St. Louis or Memphis. And the Flixbus comes here twice a day to pick up, whether it be going northbound or southbound on I-55. And that allows not only Cape Girardeau, but surrounding communities to get that affordability piece to get to St. Louis or on to further directions.
That's good. Even in rural areas, I think people have continued to express support for public transportation, even if they're not a rider. One of the things I talked about at that conference that you were at was how surveys show that 85% of Americans support public transportation, even though they don't ride it. And they like three things that it does. And it sounds like you're doing all of them well. The first one is they like that it gives people access to jobs. That's the number one reason why people are willing to invest their tax dollars. Number two is support for the elderly and people with disabilities, that they know that, my mom, I have to come home from work to take her to the doctor. If it wasn't for Ginny's service, she can get them there. And so I like that service because I don't have to take off from work to come home and get her to the doctor. And then third is lower income folks can have access to employment, like your vanpool services, et cetera, for $30 a week to ride that. I mean, that's phenomenal. Like you said, I wouldn't even pay for the gas probably to get out there for most people. So talk to us about the role that a public transit system plays in a community meeting those needs like yours.
I feel like we're that communication piece that kind of connects everything together, and people see that. I feel like for a long time, public transit had a stigma, especially in rural areas, that we were just the medical bus or we were just that piece of it. And I think that as we have grown as a population and we have a new age population that doesn't always drive, we're seeing more and more people who are not into driving, that they don't want to leave their carbon footprint, or they don't find that employment is a piece of that, or maybe they're down on their luck and they can't afford, expenses go up and not always wages go up. And so we provide that whole system transportation that is for everyone, whether that be to get to the doctor or employment. But you're right. Even the community members see that and they're investing in transit. They may not need transit, but they see the value because they need employees. Or like you said, they see that value in what we do that keeps them to where they get to continue to do themselves. But I think that more importantly, that takes one less thing off of their plate to have to worry about it as well too. So we have seen, even since I started in the last 2 years, a huge commitment from our county taxes as well as just other people. We've had more senior involvement, and our senior ridership is through the roof because, no one likes to think about transportation being free, but they help subsidize that cost to where it's affordable because seniors and wages and things don't change there.
Right. That's right.
Thanks for listening to the Transit Unplugged podcast. We are so glad you're here. If you're enjoying this show, we know you'll love our other transit industry programs. On Transit Unplugged TV, Paul Comfort explores the food, culture, and transit systems around the globe. You get to see everything. You'll love this show. And every week, we also offer up the Transit Unplugged News Minute, where you can get the latest industry headlines in less than 60 seconds. You can find out more at transitunplugged.com. Now back to Paul Comfort for this edition of the award-winning Transit Unplugged podcast.
Let's talk about the funding. I mean, for a rural system like yours, it has some urban, and you talked about how you have funding from both the urban and the rural part of things. But you probably have lots of sources of funds, right? I mean, you have to put together a potpourri of funding sources in order to make it. Talk to us about that and your role in all that, Ginny.
I think that there's a meeting for everything. And sometimes I feel like that's what my life is I get to go explain what we do to so many people and ask for that continued support. What we do, we get it from property taxes. We get it from the county commission. The city's buy-in is huge for both our fixed route services as well as our rural transportation. Contracts with these employers, outside companies, the public school district who can't handle all of their demand with other pieces of the transportation that their students need. And, we have a huge base of local support that acts as that funding. There are lots of things that do play a factor. That too is our state funding took a 42% decrease, and that's local match for our federal dollars. So that was a deal for us that we have to kind of come up with. Where do we find that money at now? And, woe is us, as I'm sure all the transportation providers could sit here and talk about, if we could figure out that magic piece to the funding, things would be so much better.
What happened with the state then? Was that like legislation that cut your funding?
It was, yeah. The Missouri state legislation cut our funding by 42%, not just our funding, but, state transit investment by 42%.
Wow. Holy moly. That's something. When I was real active here in Maryland, and I think we still have it, we had something called the Statewide Special Transportation Assistance Program, STAP. And I remember when I was managing Queen Anne's County Ride System, little small system with, under a $500,000 budget 30 years ago. But we relied on that big time for our funding. And then also what used to be called Section 18 funding, which is now, they've recodified the laws in 5307 and 5311. But those funds, those operating dollars that come down, a lot of folks maybe don't realize that is a lifeline for local transit agencies, the state and federal funding, because a lot of times local cities or counties like Cape Girardeau or Queen Anne's can't afford that. One time, Ginny, I remember I wanted to get a weekend service started. A lot of businesses had asked me, Paul, can you get, I ended up calling it the shore shopper shuttle because we live around the shore and, shopping and all that. So the county did not have the local match for a state grant that I've gotten. And a lot of times these state grants come in and they require 25% or more match to match you have to have that money locally or some other way. So the county commissioners at the time, there were 3 of them, and I was just a kid, 29 years old or whatever. And, I went in and pitched it, and they said, Paul, we just don't have the money for it, but we want you to have it. I said, well, will you let me raise the money? I don't know if you could still do this, but I went out and talked to 50 businesses around the Kent Island and Kenton area and got them all to give money to the county, between $500 and $5,000 each business did. And we raised our match so we could get the grant, so we could start this county. And in 91, we won a big award from CTAA as the best system of the year, largely on that kind of innovative thinking. So I know that, there's been raffles and cookies things, but selling cookies. People have had all kinds of crazy stories about how they raise the money. What kind of innovative ideas have you had there to kind of make up for that 40% cut? I know I didn't ask you ahead of time this question, but have you done anything to make it up?
So yes, because when I started, the system here didn't apply for some other grants that could be used for a match. And so we qualified for a METAP grant and some other opportunities. But we've also decided to go to these local entities like our local disability board to see if they would invest in paying the 20% local match required for vehicles. So then that took more money out of our budget to be able to pay for other expenses because we didn't have to come up with that match. So I think that we're not necessarily like raffling or looking for ways to fundraise. Yeah. We're more along the lines of how can we save money and ask others to pay for other things. And then vehicle investment seems to be the easiest way for us to get local investment. Yes. Because they see that as that's getting the riders still places they need to go.
That's great. Yeah. A buddy of mine who ran the system in Rochester, New York, and what he would do was, bigger than your or my county. Rochester's a little bit bigger, but same kind of funding concerns that everyone has. And he had a new factory come out at the end of a line, and they wanted the bus service to run out there. So he used software to calculate what the cost of that would be and said, great, I'm happy to extend the route, but it's going to be, let's say, $180,000 a year for me to do that, and I don't have the money. If you can come up with that differential, we'll run the bus service all the way to the end of the line for you to add you. So he had 70 businesses that were contributing to routes that had to be extended to get them. So people in the cities may not know what that's like, but in the suburban, rural areas, you got to be creative, huh?
You do. And, I always tell people, I'm never going to ask you something that I can't do. And there's been a time I've hopped in the bus seat and went and picked up riders because that's what's needed. And luckily, there's no labor union or anything like that keeps me from doing those things. But sometimes it's just everybody pitching in to make that piece work together. I
love when you said, jump in the van. I know I used to do that. I got my commercial driver's license back when I was younger because I felt like, well, one thing was that everybody that worked for me could have been my parents or grandparents. I was in my 20s and all these folks were 40, 50, 60, even in their 70s. And, I needed to earn their respect. So I needed to be able to do what they could do, right? But that is something that's unique about a smaller system as well, is that people wear multiple hats, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can't, it seems like, not only do we have a driver shortage, but we have a staff shortage that's hard to find for too, as whether it be dispatchers to, kind of help with the driver piece of it or accountants. Because, we can't always afford that. So we've subsidized this, we pushed out our accounting to an accounting firm because we can't afford to that. We don't really have a need for one all the time. So it works out well for us as well. But then, I kind of pitch in and help do that, even though that was not really my anticipation. But, I can remember the first time driving a bus and I'll never forget it. I had on a dress and high heels and I went to pick up this poor woman and she probably thought that I was crazy for showing up like that. But it is, you do what you have to do and you earn your employees' respect. And I stand behind that. I will never ask them to do something that I won't do.
I love that, Jenny. What a great philosophy. Now, one of the things that I understand you're doing is you've even started to extend into AI, artificial intelligence, and how are you using it. Can you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, our camera system that we recently purchased for our vehicles has a lot of AI integration that helps with safety features. If the driver appears to be inattentive or sleeping or sending notices when the vehicle is exceeding the posted speed limit, because it has real live tracking, and it allows us to speak to the driver through the camera system to say, hey, this has happened, and it tucks on its own. And I feel like that piece there, not only for vehicle diagnostics, because it offers that as well too. Just last week, we had a vehicle that someone forgot to check the oil on, and it told us immediately something wasn't right there. And so I think that it's that facial recognition piece of it, as well as now even our dispatching platform kind of works through the same camera system. We're passing riders up. Why did you not? It's just that piece that we have to get on board. And I won't say free technology because we're paying for our camera system, but it's allowing us to utilize a resource now with a lot of accuracy, with efficiency, safety, all of those pieces that are important to such a small budget.
Yeah, that's great. What else do you have coming in the future?
I'm just telling you, the unmet need that we see on a daily basis is crazy. So, we have future growth plans that we hope to get more vehicles, more drivers. We know that the growth is there, but that just takes time.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were in the for-profit kind of world before this and logistics and all like that. What do you think of the industry? You've been in it for a while now. First off, just generally, do you have any thoughts about working in rural America in public transportation? And also I want to ask you about the role that state transit associations play in learning new practices. I'm going to our Maryland one later this week, and I'm thinking about looking at the agenda, okay, where would I like to go? And, where can I pick up a couple ideas? Maybe I don't know yet. Talk about that a little bit for us, if you would.
Well, I feel like after being here for 10 years, I know a little bit more about the service, but there's not a book that teaches you how to do public transit. And if you live in rural America, one of the number one things that we all look forward to on our 16th birthday was getting in that car and getting our license and doing all these things. It wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I started traveling a lot and realized there's so many countries and so many different places that depend on just public transit. So for me, it was learning those rules and regulations behind it. There isn't an easy way to do that. And I really do feel like that's where state transit associations really could up their game with teaching, because sometimes they're the best resources. They're the easiest resources. MoDOT, Federal Transit Authority, all those places are so busy all the time with others outside of us that are getting into that industry. That's where I feel like we could really learn a lot from us transit professionals that are young. I also started out in payroll. So I had that aspect of being able to go in from a small HR payroll piece to growing my knowledge as I learned the company, which made me have the upper hand. I also feel that I have kind of mentored some of the new leaders that have came into rural that we have connection with that call and ask me questions. I'm like, well, I've been there, done that. Here's what I have found out. Because I think that our knowledge is power. So if we don't have a voice, we don't make those connections, then we don't know what struggles they have. And believe me, I've asked a lot of crazy questions to some of those people, but I do feel like we are our best resources.
What a great way to wrap it up. Ginny Smith, Executive Director of Cape Girardeau Transit Authority. Appreciate you kind of sharing some about your system and your philosophy and where the system is going. It's wonderful. We wish you all the best.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Transit Unplugged, the world's #1 transit executive podcast. I'm Julie Gates, executive producer of the podcast. Many thanks to the team that makes this show happen. Host and producer Paul Comfort, producer Chris O'Keefe, editor Patrick Emile, associate producer Cindy Raskin, and consultants Dan Meisner and Jonas Woost at Bumper. Transit Unplugged is being brought to you by Midaxo, passionate about moving the world's people. If you would enjoy behind-the-scenes insights and updates from the show, sign up for our weekly newsletter, which has links to can't-miss conversations with the biggest names in mobility. Head to transitunplugged.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Transit Unplugged.